Hey, Mike here with Canadian Musician. Right now, the folks at Long McQuaid on Bloor Street here in Toronto have graciously let us set up here so I can talk to my friend Ben Kaplan out of Nova Scotia. Literally just got off the flight and drove down here. So Ben, I know it's a busy day. You literally just got here. Thanks a lot for this, man.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
And so the big news out of your camp is that you have an album in the works. It's been about, I think it's about 4 years since In the Time of the Great Remembering came out to huge acclaim. I remember seeing you around that time, or maybe a year or so afterwards, at the when the Folk Alliance International thing was just here in Toronto, and being blown away by you, going searching out the album, and have been watching for you ever since. So I guess off the bat, I have to ask, why the 4-year wait between the debut album and the sophomore album?
Well, the biggest thing was just like logistics and getting money together, getting resources together, and then just pulling it off. And then, I mean, we've run into a number of snags and little delays along the way. I did most of the tracking for the record close to 18 months ago at this point, if you can believe that. Yeah, and then we did a little bit of additional tracking and overdubbing and some bunch of editing in the months that followed that. But the record, as far as my part on it, like finishing all the tracking and the editing and all of that stuff was finished maybe in November of 2014. Wow. And we've been having it mixed by this dude in Paris who is an incredible mixer, and he's worked with an A-list of international stars. And I sort of got a backroom deal with him, and I'm getting the backroom scheduling as well. So it's just been a real headache. But anyways, the mixes sound great, and I'm really happy with the finished product. So we'll get it out in the fall.
Fantastic. I know some of the songs. The title song, Birds with Broken Wings, I know just based on videos online and that you've been performing it for a few years now. Like, how old's the newest song on the album in a way? Like, how far back do these songs go in general?
How old is the newest? I mean, a lot of the songs, the oldest song on the record is probably 6 or 7 years old. I mean, there's a couple of tunes from before In the Time of the Great Remembering that didn't make that album that I was kind of bummed that I never recorded. So I found space for some of those, for maybe just even one of those on this new record. And the newest stuff on the album was like sort of made up in the studio. So there's a range of like, you know, very old material to very new material and everything in between.
How does that compare, at least for the stuff that you're kind of creating in the studio? Often with debut albums, and I don't know if this was the case with In the Time of the Great Remembering, but often with debut albums, just by the nature of it being debut, they're songs that you've had for a long time, you've been perfecting for a long time in anticipation of that first album. And then the sophomore album's kind of like, oh shit, I need to all of a sudden need some new songs in a couple years or whatever it is. Like, how was that process of writing in the studio and trying to kind of record and write as you go?
Yeah, I think a lot of the songs on the record sort of came about naturally in the period of touring the first record. I mean, there was a space of a few years there that a few songs kind of fell out of me, and then there was a few more that were sort of a product of being like, oh man, I really got to write some material. I mean, that pressure is definitely real and definitely something I experienced. Yeah, the first album was like I had this bank of songs to choose from, and the second record was like, what are we gonna do? So that's another one of the reasons why it's taken a little while. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, I'm really happy with what's come out of it. And so now it's just get this one out and start worrying about album 3 or something like that. Yeah.
For the many people that really got turned on to you from that first album and from your live shows, like lyrically and stylistically, like how is this new batch compared to what was on In the Time of the Great Remembering?
Well, I think with the first record, I didn't really know very much about making records, and I produced the album myself along with I co-produced it with my bass player Ronald Hines, and you know, I think that record in a lot of ways was trying to capture what we could do live on stage and try to transmute that through the artifice of the studio. And the new record was like, what can we do to these songs in the studio that we will never be able to do live on stage? And so it's sort of, we took a complete opposite tack, whereas like one was like, how do you transmit that raw energy in a studio? You know, there's like, how do you you know, and now my problem is like, how do you take all of the little tricks that we can do in the studio and make it work on stage? So it's, you know, there's a lot more personnel on the new record. There's maybe 35 people that were involved in working on it, over 30 musicians. And we worked with a lot of people and worked in a lot of ways that are unconventional and almost impossible to recreate live. So for example, we got this cymbalom player from Moldova, which is a tiny little former Eastern Bloc country off the side of Romania. And he plays this thing called the cymbalom, which is a rare and beautiful sounding instrument, popular in Hungarian and Romanian music. Cool. And we just sort of got him to rip and was like, hey man, I know you're used to playing in 7/8. This one's in 4/4. Give it a shot. And it was amazing. Anything that was in an odd signature, he could just nail. And 4/4 was so hard for him. And we just got him to rip. And then we went back afterwards and then we're like, this is a juicy moment. This is a cool thing. Let's chop it up and add it to this other juicy thing. And like, I think if we tried arranging for cymbalom, you know, it would have been, we wouldn't have got half of his juicy brain giving us all the cool stuff. So, and then stuff like that. So now we've got these beautiful little moments. How do you do that? How do you do that live? I don't know. I guess you don't is the answer, but it's...
Well, what were you, because you just recently wrapped up your first significant U.S. tour, if I'm not mistaken there. Like, were you playing these pretty much the new album on that tour? Like, how was that since you've gone through it?
I was playing a lot of the new songs. Some of the songs on the record, that tour, it was just me and a drummer. And a lot of the songs now rely a bit more heavily on the band. So some of the songs I wasn't able to play. And so, yeah, now I'm in this process of like, both writing new material and exploring the different ways of arranging the songs for the stage. So just having fun with that.
Before we started recording here, you're kind of talking a bit about how your band, Casual Smokers, which is a fantastic band name, by the way, and but how it's kind of like a shifting cast of characters depending where you are. Like when you're playing in Halifax, it's a slightly different lineup than when you're playing, say, tonight in Toronto. Does having, essentially, are you dictating like what they're going to play, or is the sound change according to who's in the band on a given night?
Yeah, the sound certainly changes based on who's in the band on a given night. I mean, the music requires a certain level of improvisational dexterity, and so, you know, it's this tension between finding musicians who can play the written parts as they're written, but then, you know, solo their asses off and really bring some improvisatorial spirit to other parts of the song. So there's always this dance and this tension going on within the songs. And I like to try to create room for the personalities of the different musicians to come out.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
And you're known as a Nova Scotian Halifax artist, but I know you were raised in Hamilton.
That's true, yeah.
Near here, moved out, as far as I understand, moved out to Nova Scotia, moved to Halifax for school. Just fell in love with the city, stayed there. Like, when you moved to Halifax, were you already a performer and songwriter at that stage? And like, how much did that city kind of influence what you're now doing?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I was in a couple of bands in high school. I used to play electric guitar, and you know, and haven't picked up one of those in years. And I was in a folk duo in Hamilton. I used to gig around a little bit. Yeah, when I got to Halifax, I was just sort of cutting my teeth for the first time doing solo gigs, and I started, I think my second year of university, I started doing, you know, Ben Kaplan and Friends, using the Phil Lesh model, you know, and so from there it was just a progression of like refining what do I want my band to actually sound like. Ben Kaplan and Friends went through a dozen different manifestations, and then the Casual Smokers started and collapsed and reformed and tried a bunch of things. So, you know, I think being involved in the music scene in Halifax, and particularly, I mean, not even necessarily the broader Halifax scene, but just the sort of insular scene of university kids who had like brought their cellos to school and wanted to hang out and play. You know, that's where I did a lot of my R&D, if you will. Yeah.
Interesting. Like, I'm originally from Moncton, so like a lot of friends I grew up, ended up in Halifax, going to school there. Like, Halifax is a cool city in the sense it's a pretty large city, but it's a very student-driven city. With you have the two major universities there, plus a handful of colleges. Like, the city it seems like a completely different vibe during the university college school year, in that, which I'm guessing means there's a huge cast of musicians kind of constantly coming in and out of the city. Like, do you find that kind of gives the music scene there a different vibe than compared to a more just, I guess, less transient city?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to pin it down. I mean, I don't really know what the Halifax music scene even is.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I mean, the thing about the Halifax scene is that it's got 6 universities and it's also the biggest city on the East Coast. So I feel like, you know, you have people from New Brunswick who want to like make a go in the music scene, but don't necessarily want to move to Montreal or Toronto. Yeah. Halifax is the first stop, and same with musicians from PEI and Newfoundland and rural Nova Scotia, Cape Breton. So it sort of like draws everybody into this like weird little melting pot. But then the scene, like any scene, like it definitely has its like little cliquey bits that feel hard to penetrate at first. Yeah. I mean, I think overall the scene is really supportive of new things going on, and that's great. But it definitely, like, my first few years, I definitely spent way more time with like other student come from aways than I did with like the local bands.
Yeah. Fair enough. And before we wrap up here, we talked all about the new album. I never asked, and I don't know if there's an answer for you yet, but is there a time or even just a date range in which we can expect it?
Yeah, I can't tell you. I can't tell you the release date yet because there's a few little things that have to lock in place before that date gets confirmed, but the fall for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm really excited for this one. And man, like I said off the top, I know you're busy. You literally just got in the city and now have to head to rehearsals. So I really appreciate this.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much for chatting.
Cheers, man.
All the best.